The father's justice. The first call I ever made in a crisis was to my mother, and the last call she ever needed to make in hers was to me. And that wasn't a coincidence. That was 53 years of quiet, unbroken loyalty shaping a man who never learned how to hesitate when she needed him. Her name is Dorothy Carter, and if you had met her, you wouldn't have called her extraordinary, but you would have remembered her, because she was the kind of woman who showed up, every time, without asking for anything in return. She sat through every little league game I ever played, even the ones where I never left the bench. In a folding chair she carried herself, like being there mattered more than anything else in the world. She packed my lunches long past the age I pretended to be embarrassed, and waited up every night I came home late, not to question me, just to make sure I was safe before she let herself rest. That was her. Steady, quiet, consistent. The kind of love that never announces itself, but never once fails to arrive. When my father passed years ago, on a cold morning that never quite left me, she didn't collapse, didn't call for help, didn't make a scene. She just adjusted, sold what she had to sell, held the house together, and kept showing up the same way she always had. Not once did she call me to say she was struggling. Not once did she ask for anything. And maybe that's why, when my phone lit up that morning, I felt it before I even saw her name. It was early, the kind of early where the world hasn't decided what it wants to be yet. And I was standing in the kitchen, watching coffee drip into a glass pot, like time itself was slowing down, when my phone buzzed against the counter. Dorothy Carter. I answered on the second ring. James. Her voice wasn't right, not weak, not exactly, but thinner than it should have been, like something inside her had shifted. Mom. What's wrong? I was already moving before she answered, already reaching for my keys, already halfway out of the moment and into action. I didn't want to bother you. 82 years old and still apologizing for needing help. Mom, it's just, my chest feels tight, and my left arm. She paused, just for a second, but it was enough. That was all I needed. 53 years of her showing up, without hesitation, without conditions, had built something in me that didn't allow for questions, or delays, or second thoughts. I'm coming. I didn't ask anything else, didn't wait for reassurance, didn't give her space to downplay it, because I knew she would. James, it's probably nothing. Mom, sit down, unlock the door. I'm on my way. I ended the call and stood still for exactly 3 seconds, not to think, but to calculate, because the world doesn't pause just because your heart does. My truck was in the shop, useless, waiting on a repair that suddenly felt irrelevant, and the only car available sat in the driveway, untouched, ready, belonging to someone who had never learned what it meant to show up without being asked. And somewhere between the silence of that kitchen and the echo of my mother's voice in my head, I realized something I wasn't ready to name yet. There was only one thing in my world that mattered in that moment, and it was getting to Dorothy Carter, before that tightness in her chest turned into something we couldn't take back. The call ended, and for exactly 3 seconds, the house went completely silent, not peaceful, not calm, just the kind of silence that presses against your chest when something is already wrong and about to get worse. My keys were in my hand, my mind already moving ahead of my body, mapping the fastest way to get to Dorothy Carter, when reality cut in. My truck wasn't there. It sat useless at the repair shop, waiting on an alternator, a small mechanical problem that suddenly felt like a wall between my mother and me. But there was another option. Claire's car, parked right outside, full tank, untouched, ready. Upstairs, I could hear the shower running. Long, steady, unhurried. Like time, meant something different up there. Claire, no answer. Just water hitting tile, consistent, indifferent. Claire, the water shut off. A pause. What? Not concern, not urgency, just irritation. like I had interrupted something more important than whatever was happening to my mother. I need your car. My mom's having chest pain, her left arm. I have to get her to the hospital. The words came out fast, controlled, but carrying weight I didn't have time to soften. Silence again. Not confusion, not processing, decision. She appeared at the top of the stairs a moment later, robe tied loosely, hair wrapped in a towel, her expression completely flat, as I had just asked about the weather. I can't today. For a second, I thought I heard it wrong. Claire, my mom's in trouble. I heard you. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, already halfway out of the conversation. Call an ambulance. She hates ambulances. You know that. I just need the car. I'll bring it right back. Another pause. Shorter this time. Sharper. I have dinner tonight. The sentence landed in the space between us. Wrong. Completely out of place. Like she had stepped into the wrong conversation and didn't notice. Dinner? I repeated it. Not because I didn't hear her, but because my mind was trying to catch up to the idea that this was real. With Joanne and the girls. I've been planning it all week. She said it calmly, like this was a scheduling conflict. Like my mother's heart was an inconvenience she needed to work around. Claire. My voice dropped. Not louder, not angry, just lower, steadier, the way it gets when something shifts inside you. Her left arm is going numb. That should have been the moment. The point where everything changes. The point where someone steps forward, says yes, shows up. Instead, she sighed. She's your mother, James, not mine. And then, the words that would replay in my head long after everything else faded. Figure it out. No hesitation. No softness. No second thought. Just a clean, final decision. She turned, walked back into the bedroom, and closed the door quietly behind her. Not slammed, not angry, just closed, like the conversation had ended exactly the way she intended. I stood there, in the middle of the hallway, keys still in my hand, trying to process how two realities could exist at the same time. Upstairs, hot water, dinner plans, controlled routines. Downstairs, urgency, fear, an 8-2-year-old woman sitting alone with her chest tightening and her arm going numb. And between those two realities was Claire. Not choosing, not hesitating, choosing. That was the moment something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. Because anger burns fast, but clarity settles in quietly and stays. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice, didn't try to convince her to care. Because you can't negotiate empathy. You can't explain urgency to someone who doesn't feel it. I looked at that closed door for 1 second, just one, and realized something I should have seen years ago. This wasn't about a car. This wasn't about timing. This wasn't about one bad decision. This was about who shows up and who doesn't. And Claire Carter had just made her answer very clear. The door closed behind Claire, soft, final. And for a moment, I just stood there in the hallway with my keys in my hand, not frozen, not confused, just clear, in a way that didn't leave room for emotion. Because once something reveals itself that completely, you don't argue with it, you move around it. I pulled my phone out and scrolled exactly 3 names before I stopped. Walter Hayes. He lived 4 houses down, same street, the same rhythm of life. The kind of man who still waved when he drove past, who remembered birthdays without reminders, who showed up at my father's funeral without being asked, and stayed until the last chair was folded. I hit call. 1 ring. James? His voice was steady, awake, like he was already in the day. Walter, I need a favor. I didn't explain it carefully, didn't soften it, didn't wrap it in anything polite. My mom's having chest pain. My truck's in the shop. Claire's car. I stopped myself. Didn't need to say it. There was no pause on the other end. No sigh. No question about timing. I'm on my way. That was it. 4 words. No conditions. No hesitation. No, let me check something. Just movement. I'll be out front in a minute, I said. Make it 2. I'll beat you there. The line went dead, and for the first time since that call from my mother, the pressure in my chest shifted, just slightly. Because there's a difference between people who care and people who act. And in moments like this, only one of those things matters. I called my mother back immediately. Mom, Walter's coming. We're taking you to the hospital. Oh, honey, you didn't have to. She started to apologize again. Mom, unlock the door and sit down. I said it gently, but firmly. I'm almost there. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside into the cold morning air. Sharp, honest, the kind that wakes you up whether you're ready or not. And then I saw him. Walter's car was already turning onto the street, old sedan, engine humming like it had been ready before the call even came. He pulled up in front of my house in under 4 minutes, maybe less. I didn't check. I didn't need to. He rolled the window down. You good? Not yet. Let's fix that. No speech. No performance. Just presence. I got in, and as we pulled away from the house, I looked back once, just once, at the driveway, at Claire's car still sitting there, untouched, exactly where it had been when everything started. 2 cars, 2 choices, 2 kinds of people. Upstairs, warm water, plans, distance. Down here, cold air, urgency, movement. Walter didn't ask questions on the drive, didn't fill the silence, just kept his hands steady on the wheel, eyes forward, doing exactly what needed to be done. And somewhere between my street and my mother's house, with the morning light cutting across the windshield, I realized something simple, something permanent. Some people explain, some people excuse, some people delay, and some people show up. We pulled into the emergency entrance faster than the morning traffic should have allowed, tires rolling over that faded red line like crossing into a different kind of time, the kind where every second suddenly matters more than it did 5 minutes ago. Walter didn't park right away. He stopped just long enough for me to get out. Go, he said. I'll handle the rest. I nodded once, already moving, already halfway to the door before it closed behind me. Dorothy Carter's front door was unlocked, just like I told her, and I found her sitting in the living room chair, her good blue coat folded neatly over her lap, like she was waiting to go somewhere important. Not the emergency room. Hey, Mom. She looked up, small smile, a little too calm for what was happening inside her body. I'm sorry to make a fuss, she said. You're not. I crossed the room and took her hand, warm, steady, but lighter than it should have been. Let's go. Walter had the car ready by the time we stepped outside, back door open, engine running. The drive to the hospital blurred into something tight and quiet, the kind of silence that holds more than words ever could. She sat beside me in the back seat, her hand in mine, both of us, pretending that holding on was enough to keep things from getting worse. At the hospital, the doors slid open with that familiar mechanical sound, and everything changed at once. Bright lights, sharp smells, voices layered over each other, controlled chaos, disguised as routine. Chest pain, I said at the front desk, the words landing heavier than they sounded. Left arm numbness, she's 82. That was enough. They moved quickly, not rushing, but not wasting anything either. A nurse guided her through the hallway, steady hands, practiced eyes, and within minutes, Dorothy Carter was in a bed with wires across her chest and machines, quietly translating her body into numbers. I stood just outside the curtain for a moment, watching, adjusting to the reality of it, before stepping in. James. Her voice was softer now, thinner than before, but still hers. I'm here. I pulled a chair close enough that she didn't have to reach. A few minutes later, a tall man in a white coat stepped in, calm, measured, the kind of presence that doesn't need to announce itself. Dr. Benjamin Clark, he said, offering a brief nod. Mrs. Carter, we're going to run an EKG and check your cardiac enzymes. He spoke clearly, not rushed, not overly reassuring, just honest. The symptoms you're describing, we don't ignore them at your age. Dorothy nodded, composed, dignified, even lying in a hospital bed with monitors attached to her chest. She glanced at me, not asking the doctor, asking me. I leaned forward slightly. Do whatever he says, Mom. She held my gaze for a second, then nodded again. Decision made. Time stretched after that, minutes folding into something slower, heavier, marked only by the quiet rhythm of machines and footsteps outside the curtain. When Dr. Clark returned, his expression was steady, not urgent, but serious enough to settle the room. Mr. Carter, he said, turning to me briefly, your mother experienced what we would classify as a mild cardiac event. The words landed, controlled, clinical, but they carried weight. Not a full heart attack, but it's her body sending a warning. We want to keep her for observation, adjust her medications, run a few more tests. I exhaled slowly, not relief, but not panic either. She's stable? She's stable. I nodded, once, letting that word settle where it needed to. When he left, the room grew quiet again, softer this time. Dorothy looked at me, really looked, like she was measuring something deeper than the moment. Then she reached up, her hand brushing my cheek, the same way she used to when I was a kid. You came, she said. Just that. 2 words. Simple, quiet, but carrying 53 years of something that didn't need explaining. For a second, everything else disappeared. The machines, the lights, the noise outside, all of it faded behind those 2 words. I swallowed, kept my voice steady. I'll always come, Mom. She nodded, satisfied, like that answer had been enough all along, then leaned back against the pillow and closed her eyes. Not afraid, not uncertain, just resting. And I sat there beside her, in that plastic chair under fluorescent light, knowing that whatever else was broken in my life, this part, had never failed. Time settled into something quieter after the doctor left. Not calm exactly, but steadier, like the room had accepted what had happened and was waiting to see what would come next. The machines continued their soft, consistent rhythm, translating Dorothy Carter's heartbeat into lines and numbers, while the world outside the curtain moved on without us. I stayed in that chair beside her bed, not checking my phone, not thinking about anything beyond the space between her hand and mine. The space, I made sure, never stayed empty for long. She rested for a while, eyes closed, breathing even, but not asleep. I could tell, because my mother had never been the kind of person who disappeared from a moment completely, even when she was tired. After some time, she opened her eyes again, slowly, like she was returning from somewhere deeper than rest. James. I'm here. Her gaze held mine for a second, steady, clear, the way it always had when she was about to say something that mattered. Did Claire come? She didn't ask it sharply, didn't layer it with accusation, didn't even add anything to it. Just a simple question, placed carefully between us. I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I understood what the answer would do once it existed in the room. She had dinner plans. I kept my voice level, controlled, the way you speak when you don't want to add weight to something that already has enough. Dorothy didn't react the way most people would. She didn't frown, didn't sigh, didn't ask anything else right away. She just nodded. Slow, deliberate, like she was placing a piece into a puzzle that had been forming for a long time. I see. That was all she said. But I watched her face, the small changes most people would miss, the way her eyes shifted slightly toward the window, the way her hand adjusted against the blanket, not restless, not upset, just settling. Because this wasn't new information to her. Not really. This was confirmation. She's been busy, I added, out of habit more than intention. The reflex of a man who had spent years smoothing over edges that didn't belong to him. Dorothy's eyes came back to mine, not sharp, Not disappointed, just clear. James. Just my name. The way she had said it when I was younger, when I tried to explain something that didn't need explaining. I stopped. She didn't correct me, didn't argue, didn't list reasons or examples. She didn't need to, because she already knew. And more importantly, she no longer needed me to pretend otherwise. Her hand rested on the blanket, fingers relaxed, no tension, no anger. "I'm not upset," she said quietly. And I believed her. That was the part that settled deepest, the absence of emotion where you would expect it most. "I just understand." There was no bitterness in it, no edge, no attempt to make a point. Just truth, simple, complete, and final in a way that didn't need to raise its voice. She looked toward the window again, the late morning light stretching across the room. Soft, steady, the kind of light that doesn't rush anything. "I've had a lot of time to see things clearly," she continued, almost to herself. "Not just yesterday." Each word landed gently, but they carried history behind them. Years of small moments, missed ones, choices that seemed insignificant until they weren't. I felt something shift in my chest. Not sharp, not sudden, just a quiet recognition of something I had been standing next to for a long time, without turning to face it. Dorothy turned back to me, her expression unchanged, still composed, still grounded in the same quiet dignity she carried into everything. "People show you who they are, James," she said. "No judgment, no anger, just a statement. And at some point, you have to decide what to do with that." She didn't say anything else after that. Didn't need to. Because in that hospital room, with the machines humming softly and the light holding steady against the window, something had already begun to take shape. Not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. The kind of clarity that doesn't come from one moment, but from all the moments that came before it, finally aligning into something you can no longer ignore. And I knew, even before she said another word, that whatever decision came next, it wouldn't be made in anger. It would be made in truth. The room stayed quiet after that, not empty, but settled, as something had already been decided even before it was spoken, out loud. Dorothy Carter reached for her glasses on the bedside table. Not rushed, not dramatic, just the same deliberate motion she had used her entire life when something mattered. "James." I leaned forward slightly. "I'm here. I want to call Edward Monroe this morning." The name landed with weight. Not unfamiliar, not surprising, but final, in a way that didn't invite interruption. Edward Monroe had handled my father's estate years ago, precise, patient, the kind of attorney who didn't waste words or misunderstand intentions. "Okay," I said carefully. She looked at me, steady, clear. "I've been thinking, for a long time. Not since yesterday. Not since the hospital. For a long time. That was the part that settled deepest. Mom." "You don't have to." "James." Just my name. Flat, calm, and enough to stop me completely. She didn't raise her voice. Didn't explain further. She didn't need to. Because this wasn't a reaction. This was a conclusion. She picked up the small folded paper from beside her glasses case. Edward Monroe's direct number was written in her own careful handwriting. Prepared. That word sat in the room longer than anything else. She dialed. Second ring. "Edward Monroe." "Edward." "It's Dorothy Carter." There was a shift on the other end. Subtle, respectful. "Mrs. Carter, how are you?" "I'm in the hospital," she said simply. Stable, but clear. A brief pause. "Professional. Attentive. What can I do for you?" "I need to update my will." No hesitation. No softening. Just truth, stated exactly the way she intended it. "I can come by this afternoon," he said. "Would that work?" "Yes." She glanced at me for a moment, not asking, informing. "My son will be here." "Of course." The call ended, and she set the phone down as calmly as she had picked it up, as she had just confirmed an appointment, not shifted the direction of everything that would come after. I sat there, quiet, not because I didn't have questions, but because I already understood the answer behind all of them. "This isn't about yesterday," she said, almost reading the thought before I spoke it. "No." She folded her hands lightly over the blanket, fingers resting against each other, steady, controlled. Yesterday just made it clear. That was it. Not anger. Not punishment. Clarity. She looked toward the window again, the same soft light stretching across the floor, unchanged, unaffected by what was happening inside the room. "Your father and I built everything we have together," she said quietly. "Every dollar, every piece of it. We built it with intention." Her voice didn't waver, and I've spent enough years watching where that intention does and does not continue. She turned back to me, and this time, there was something more in her eyes. Not emotion. Not exactly. But memory. "Claire didn't come to your father's funeral reception," she said. The words weren't sharp, just placed. She said she had a headache. I didn't respond. "She didn't come when I had my hip surgery. You remember that?" I did. "You took time off work to drive me to every appointment." Another piece, set down carefully. "Christmas 2 years ago, when I had that flu." She paused briefly. "You left dinner early to check on me." I swallowed, said nothing. "And yesterday." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to, because the pattern didn't require explanation anymore. It had already explained itself. "I'm not angry, James." She said it again, not to convince me, but because it was true. "I'm just accurate." That word settled deeper than anything else she had said. Accurate. Not emotional. Not reactive. Measured. She reached for her crossword book, not to distract herself, but because that's who she was. Someone who could make a life-altering decision and still return to something simple without needing to perform it. "I've earned the right to decide where my life goes," she continued, eyes still on the page. "And I've decided." No emphasis. No pause. Just a line drawn, clean and permanent. I leaned back in the chair, exhaled slowly, and for the first time since all of this began, I understood exactly where the center of it was. Not the hospital. Not Claire. Not even me. It was Dorothy Carter, and the quiet, undeniable authority of a woman who had spent 82 years showing up, deciding, finally, who deserved the same. Edward Monroe arrived just before the hour. Not early, not late, precise in the way only someone accustomed to decisions of consequence knows how to be. Charcoal suit, leather briefcase, movements controlled and economical. He stepped into that hospital room as if he understood exactly what kind of space he was entering. "Mrs. Carter." A slight nod, respectful, measured. "Edward." Dorothy returned it with the same quiet certainty she had carried through everything. No small talk, no unnecessary words. He took a seat beside the bed, opened his briefcase, and placed a yellow legal pad across his lap. Pen ready, eyes attentive, but never intrusive. "I understand you'd like to make some revisions," he said. "Yes." One word. Clear. Final. I sat in the corner of the room, not part of the conversation, but not separate from it either. A witness to something that had been building long before this moment. Dorothy didn't rush, didn't dramatize. She spoke the way she always had, deliberate, composed, certain of every word before it left her. "The house on Maplewood Drive," she began. "We'll go to James Carter, in full." Edward wrote without interruption. "The investment accounts. A portion will be designated for the Hartford Animal Shelter. $20,000, specifically. A small detail, but not small, to her. Nothing she said was ever casual. The remainder, to James. Line by line, piece by piece. The life she and my father had built together was being placed exactly where she believed it belonged. The furniture, the jewelry, the personal items that carried history no one else would recognize, all directed with the same careful intention. "And the Mustang," she added. Edward glanced up briefly, The 1967 Ford Mustang, she said. It goes to James. I felt that one settled differently, not because of the value, but because of what it held. Years of my father's hands, his time, his pride, preserved in something that still ran. Edward nodded once and continued writing. There was no confusion, no hesitation, because this wasn't a negotiation. It was a declaration. When she finished, the room held still for a moment, not waiting, just acknowledging. Edward reviewed his notes, flipped a page, then looked up. And Mrs. Carter, your daughter-in-law, Claire Carter, is there any provision you would like to include? The question hung in the air, neutral, procedural, exactly as it should have been. Dorothy didn't look at me, didn't look away. She answered exactly the same way she had answered everything else. No. Not sharp. Not cold. Just complete. Edward gave a slight nod, no reaction, no judgment, and wrote it down the same way he had written every other instruction. Because in that room, the absence of her name carried as much weight as anything else that had been said. When he closed the folder, the sound was soft, but it marked the end of something permanent. I'll have the updated documents prepared and filed immediately, he said. Thank you, Edward. He stood, shook my hand briefly on his way out. Firm grip, steady eyes, the kind of look that says he understands more than he needs to say. Your mother, he added quietly, glancing back once, is very clear. I nodded. I know. When the door closed behind him, the room returned to its earlier stillness. But it wasn't the same stillness anymore. Because something had shifted, not emotionally, but structurally. Everything Claire had assumed, expected, counted on, without ever saying it out loud, was gone. Not taken. Not argued. Removed. Cleanly. Legally. Finally, Dorothy picked up her crossword again, turning the page as if nothing extraordinary had happened. As if she hadn't just redirected the entire outcome of her life's work with a few measured sentences. And I sat there, watching her, understanding something with absolute clarity. This wasn't revenge. This was alignment. A life built on showing up, ending exactly where it belonged. We left the hospital in the late morning. The air outside was cool and clean, the kind that feels honest against your skin after hours under fluorescent lights. Dorothy Carter insisted on walking to the truck herself, slow, careful, but steady, her independence intact in a way that mattered more to her than anything the doctor had written down. Walter had already pulled up by the curb, engine running, no questions asked, just the same quiet reliability he had carried from the moment I called him. The drive to Maplewood Drive felt different on the way back, less urgent, but heavier. Like something had settled that couldn't be undone. Her house stood at the end of the street exactly as it always had. White siding, green shutters, the oak tree out front shedding the last of its leaves. Everything familiar, everything still standing. Home. I helped her inside, not because she needed it, but because I wanted to be close enough in case she did. She moved through the doorway slowly, taking in the space like she was returning to something she had never really left. I'm all right, she said softly, more to reassure me than herself. I know. The kitchen was exactly the same. The table worn just enough to show its history. The cabinets still holding everything in the same place they had for years. A life built carefully and maintained with quiet consistency. I put water on for tea, chamomile, steeped the way she liked it, 4 minutes exactly, no shortcuts. She sat at the table, hands resting around the cup once I placed it in front of her, the warmth settling into her fingers. We went through the medications one by one, labels read out loud, times repeated, not rushed, not careless, just making sure everything was exactly where it needed to be. For a while, we didn't say anything, not because there was nothing to say, but because silence between us had never needed filling. Then she looked at me, really looked, the way she had in the hospital when she asked about Claire. James. I sat down across from her. What I did, with the will, I started to shake my head slightly. Mom, you don't have to explain. I'm not explaining. Her voice stayed calm, steady, but there was something firmer underneath it now. I need you to understand. I stopped. It wasn't to punish Claire. She said it simply, without hesitation, without any edge. That's not how I've lived my life. I nodded slowly, because I knew that was true. Everything she had ever done came from intention, not reaction. It was because it was right, she continued. Your father and I built everything in this house together, every piece of it, and it belongs with someone who understands what it means to build something and to protect it. Her eyes held mine, not questioning, not searching, just certain. You understand that? The words settled deeper than I expected. I do, I said quietly. She studied my face for a moment, then leaned back slightly, her hands still wrapped around the cup. And now I need you to think about something else. The shift in her tone was subtle, but clear. Not the money, not the house, none of that. She gestured lightly around the kitchen, everything and nothing at once. Your life. I didn't respond right away. About whether you're happy, she said. About whether you're being loved the way you deserve to be loved. Each word landed carefully, not heavy, but impossible to ignore. Because you've been showing up alone for a long time, James. That one stayed. The room felt smaller for a second, quieter, like everything outside had pulled back just enough to let that truth settle fully. A man who shows up, she added, softer now, but no less certain, deserves someone standing next to him when he does. I looked down at the table, the same table she had helped me with homework on, the same place where she had held my hand after my father died, where words were never necessary for understanding. Yeah, I said finally, my voice lower than I expected, but clear. I know. She nodded once, satisfied, like that answer was enough. Good. Then she lifted her cup, took a slow sip of tea, and set it back down, as if she hadn't just said something that would stay with me far longer than anything written in that will. Because what she had given me in that moment wasn't instruction. It was clarity. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sun had shifted just enough to throw long shadows across the front of the house, the kind that make everything look the same, but feel completely different. Claire's car was still there, exactly where it had been that morning, untouched, like nothing had happened, like nothing had mattered. My phone buzzed again in the cup holder. Claire. Again. I didn't answer. Not yet. 34 missed calls by the time I turned the engine off, the screen lighting up over and over like urgency had finally found its way to her, just a little too late. I stepped out of the truck, the air colder now, sharper, and walked to the front door without rushing, without hesitation, because whatever was waiting inside, I already understood it. She was in the living room, standing before I even closed the door, phone still in her hand. Her composure cracked just enough to show what had been building underneath it all day. James. My name came out fast, uneven, like she had been holding it in for hours. I've been calling you. I know. I set my keys down, slow, deliberate, the sound landing heavier than it should have in the quiet room. Did you know? She asked, stepping closer, eyes searching, not for truth, but for something she could still control. About the will? Did you know she was going to do that? No. The answer didn't need anything else. I found out the same way you did. She pressed her lips together, trying to gather herself, but the edges were already slipping. Then talk to her, she said quickly. James, please, ask her to reconsider. Tell her it was a misunderstanding. I was going to go to the hospital. You just what? I didn't raise my voice. Didn't step closer. Didn't need to. The question stopped her anyway, because there wasn't an answer that could stand in the space she had created. She looked at me, really looked this time, and I saw it. Not anger, not pride, fear. She took me out completely, Claire said, her voice lower now, tighter. Everything, the house, the accounts. James, do you understand what that means? I do. My voice stayed level, steady, the way it had been all day. Then fix it, she said, the words coming out faster now, closer to panic. Talk to her. Tell her it was a mistake. She'll listen to you. I shook my head once. Not dramatic, not final, just honest. She made her decision. The room went still. The words didn't hit like anger. They settled like truth, and that made them harder to move. James. Her voice broke slightly on my name. The first real fracture. She's 82 years old, I said quietly. She spent her entire life showing up for everyone, every time, without hesitation. I paused, just long enough for it to land. And yesterday, I didn't need to finish it. We both knew. You had dinner. The silence that followed was different from all the others, heavier, fuller, because it wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with everything she had chosen not to do. I didn't think, I know. I cut her off, not sharply, just cleanly. That's the problem. She stepped back slightly, like the distance might give her something to hold on to, but there was nothing there. James, please. The word sounded different now, smaller, stripped of everything it usually carried, but it didn't move anything in me. Not anger, not guilt, not even hesitation, because something had already shifted. Earlier, quietly, and it wasn't going back. She made her decision, I repeated. Not louder, not harder, just the same. And so did you. That was the moment. Not explosive, not dramatic, but complete. I watched it land in her eyes, the understanding, not just of what she lost on paper, but of what had already slipped away long before that. Not the house, not the money. Me. She opened her mouth like she was going to say something else, something that might change the direction of everything, but nothing came. Because there wasn't anything left that could. Her phone buzzed in her hand again. She looked down. Dorothy Carter. She looked back up at me, hope flickering for just a second, fragile, uncertain. I met her gaze, steady, clear, and felt the last thread of something I had been holding on to for years finally go still. You should answer that, I said. No anger, no edge, just clarity. I picked up my keys, turned toward the door, and stepped out into the cold air, leaving the house behind me in a way that felt, for the first time, complete. I stood on that porch longer than I needed to, the cold air settling into my lungs, clear, sharp, honest in a way my life hadn't been for a long time. And for the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what to fix, or what to explain, or how to make something work that never really had. I was just clear. 11 years. That's how long I had been telling myself things were fine, that silence meant peace, that patience would eventually turn into something shared. But it hadn't. It had just turned into endurance. And there's a difference between building a life with someone and quietly carrying one alone. I didn't feel angry. That was the part that surprised me the most. No heat. No rush. Just the steady understanding that some things don't break all at once. They reveal themselves slowly, until one moment finally makes it impossible to look away. Tonight wasn't about decisions. Not yet. It was about distance. About stepping away long enough to see everything exactly as it was, without the noise, without the excuses, without the habit of staying just because I always had. So I got in my truck, started the engine, and didn't turn back toward that house. Not that night. Maybe not again. Because love, real love, doesn't hesitate when it matters. It doesn't negotiate presence or schedule it around convenience. And money, houses, inheritance, they don't create value. They reveal it. They show you who understands what something is worth and who is only waiting to receive it. Dorothy Carter spent 82 years showing up for the people she loved, without condition, without delay. And in the end, she simply chose to give everything she built to someone who knew how to do the same. So here's the question I'll leave you with. If everything you've built, everything you've given, had to go to someone who truly showed up for you, would you be confident in who that person is, or would you hesitate?